mean to be inclusive? Verna Myers once said that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. So, how do we create an inclusive space in a world that prioritizes diversity? Let's count the ways. Welcome back. First and foremost, when it comes to inclusion, we need to address the elephant in the room, named DEI. A lot of people are under the assumption that in order to promote inclusivity, we also have to promote this diversity, equity, and inclusion movement that has emerged in the workplaces and in schools. However, a little known fact about this movement is that disability has never been a significant concern. They almost exclusively focus on diversity as it pertains to race or sexual identity, and the disabled population is pretty much left completely out of the conversation. And ironically, both right and left-wing disability advocates agree that corporations view disability as a separate issue from that of DEI. So, for the past 6 years, both corporately and politically, the disabled community has largely been left out of these inclusivity discussions, which, while understandably frustrating for some people, is honestly kind of a good thing. Because it's really not enough for inclusion to be presented as a special project through mandatory training or hiring bias. And I'm not denying that there is not a significant need for inclusion in the workplace, but to try and address it using this particular strategy is just not going to be super effective. The DEI movement was never designed or intended to be used as an advocacy outlet for the disabled community. It is very clear that they really don't have the desire to prioritize this. It's actually the ADA, not DEI, that governs the hiring process for disabled adults in the corporate world. And it is the ADA that states, quote, employers cannot discriminate against qualified individuals with disabilities and must provide reasonable accommodations to allow them to be able to perform essential job functions, unless it causes undue hardship, end quote. It's also ADA law and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, not DEI, a lot of abbreviations, that are responsible for enforcing the laws surrounding disability in the corporate world. I've noticed that people often confuse the role of ADA and the role of DEI, so I wanted to clear the air a little bit there by addressing the specific differences. But now, back to inclusion. It is more than a social ideal. And it's a practical and transformative approach to how people live and learn and work together. Because the core of inclusion is striving to create an environment where individuals of all abilities are not only present, but empowered to participate fully. Inclusion in the workplaces and schools and the churches shapes culture and it strengthens communities. And it really leads to more intentional human connection. And while each of these spaces serve a different purpose, the importance of inclusion within them is deeply interconnected because there is a lot of power in businesses and schools and places of worship. There's a lot of power if they strive to foster dignity and to recognize the inherent worth of every individual. So let's look at them one at a time. From a workplace perspective, inclusion is really essential for both moral and practical reasons. This is because inclusive workplaces who strive to ensure that employees receive respect and equal opportunity and are able to contribute their own unique gifts and talents are really amazing examples of true inclusion. I have gotten the opportunity to experience this kind of atmosphere at a few different places. One is at a coffee shop called Biddy and Bose, and they originated in Waco, Texas, but now are quickly spreading across the United States. And the unique thing about these coffee shops is that they employ adults with disabilities. And the employees that they hire are placed uniquely in roles that allow their strengths and abilities to shine. The coffee is amazing, and the people even more so, and I love visiting because the atmosphere is so positive and encouraging. Similarly, there's another coffee shop in Georgia called Mend. And this entire business is oriented around being inclusive and accessible. Not only do they focus on hiring and training adults with physical and intellectual disabilities, but every aspect of their store is fully accessible. The ordering counter is wheelchair height. They have adjustable tables, accessible bathrooms, adult changing tables, etc. There's also a really amazing private school in Dallas that I used to be a substitute teacher for. And part of what made their atmosphere so unique is that it was oriented completely around serving children on the autism spectrum disorder. But they also employed individuals on the autism spectrum as teachers, teachers' aides, and substitute teachers. And it was a truly wonderful atmosphere where everybody was working together to build life skills and just practical educational skills like reading and math and art. Inclusion in the workplace is also wonderful because it drives innovation. Employees have a wider range of perspectives and are able to engage in more creative problem solving. And when workplaces include voices that might otherwise be marginalized, they gain access to insights that would be lost. Mend is a perfect example of this, because by including individuals with disabilities in the building design, they were able to create a very accessible and more inclusive place for everyone. So workplace inclusion is not just about fairness, it really is a strategic advantage, because it recognizes the unique gifts and talents of those living with disabilities and fosters a culture where they are respected and supported. So now we have a fairly good understanding of inclusivity in the workplace, right? But how does this translate to schools? This environment is very unique because it plays an extremely foundational role in shaping how young people understand themselves and others. So I'll give you an example. When my mom was growing up in elementary school, and this was back in the old 1980s, 1970s era, I won't try to date her here, but when she was in elementary school, part of the initiative that they did was to bring students who were in mainstream education into special education classrooms and vice versa. They would let the kids interact with one another during recess or during lunch, and although many of the children in the SPED programs were not mainstreamed yet, they still had the opportunity to engage with the general school population. And this had an extremely positive impact on my mom and other kids at the elementary school, because they were able to make friends and they were able to learn about these children's experience. And likewise, these kids in SPED had an opportunity to make friends outside of their own individual classrooms. So it was this opportunity for inclusion to the best of that school's ability, right? And it made a positive impact on every single child that was involved in the process. Inclusive education ensures that students of all abilities and backgrounds are able to learn together rather than being separated based on differences. And I know this can be difficult, especially sometimes with the more extreme behaviors that come alongside autism. And so sometimes full inclusion isn't necessarily possible. But providing opportunities for these students to interact with one another, even just in small moments like during recess or during lunch, can make a profound impact. Because historically, students have been excluded from mainstream classrooms. And sometimes it's because of safety, or sometimes it's because there's just not enough teachers to be able to effectively foster that inclusion. But it's something that's definitely worth thinking about. And it's worth bringing up to, principals and school boards. Because effective inclusion in education settings requires a lot of intentional support. Teachers have to be equipped, and inclusion is most successful when it's embedded into the values and practices of the entire school community, rather than treated as just an afterthought. So clearly, it is very important in the corporate world and in schools, but it also translates over to churches, right? And other faith communities. This is because inclusion continues to carry a unique and profound significance. Church spaces, are often centered around teachings of love and compassion, making inclusion not only a social responsibility, but oftentimes a spiritual one. When churches embrace this, they reflect the belief that every person is created with an inherent worth and purpose. A great example of this that I had the opportunity to experience is a Johnny and Friends family retreat. What this organization tries to foster when these families come to camp is a church experience. They have the opportunities to engage in Bible study and in worship and in community with one another. It's oriented around faith, but the point is inclusion. Seeing all these families and these children for exactly who they are, and loving and accepting them for their unique gifts and talents and personality quirks. Another important thing about inclusion when it comes to churches is that it kind of gives us an opportunity to both give and receive the love of Christ, right? In scripture, it talks about, loving the least of these, being the hands and feet of Jesus. And this certainly applies to the disability community. But likewise, we can often see the image of Christ mirrored back to us in people living with disability, because they give unconditional love. They show incredible resilience. And so it really is just an opportunity for the entire church community to benefit, making an effort to include these families and to include these children. But despite its importance, inclusion in workplace and schools and churches is not without its challenges. Some may view this as inconvenient or unnecessary, particularly if they have not personally been impacted by disability. And I think this can definitely be the case in a lot of workplaces and in a lot of churches. If you don't have any skin in the game, it can be kind of difficult to reason, okay, why make this effort? Why try to make our workplace more inclusive? Why do we need to create a special education program in our church? What's the point? It seems like a lot of extra work. But I want to challenge those people to really stop and think about the incredible benefit. Inclusion is hugely important, not just for the people who want to be included, but for the people who are missing out on the disability community, because they have so much to offer. They're truly worthy of being around. These challenges that sometimes come with inclusion underscore the need for continued dialogue and education and advocacy, because it's not a one-time achievement, right? Inclusion is an ongoing process, and it requires commitment and reflection. Ultimately, the importance of it lies in the ability to affirm human dignity and to strengthen communities. In workplaces, it leads to innovation. In schools, it shapes compassion. And in churches, it embodies spiritual values and fosters genuine belonging. Across all these spaces, inclusion is the catalyst that transforms places where people simply exist into places where they can truly thrive.